Hey, can you hear me? Good morning. This morning we are going to be considering something called the Pictograph. I want to start with a verse in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, because today's the day we celebrate the resurrection. We remember it. And once he's raised from the dead, what then? He never dies. He lives forever. And his resurrection is the evidence that everything else we're going to talk about this morning, all of his sacrifice, it's the evidence that God accepted it, that it worked, that everything he did satisfied what God was looking for. Jesus' resurrection is unprecedented in the religions of the world. No one else's God rose from the dead. And beyond that, no one else's God calls himself Father. And isn't looking for a list of rules for you to satisfy, but is saying, hey, I did it for you. You couldn't do it. I knew you couldn't do it. That's unprecedented. And if you're a born-again believer this morning, that means if at some point in your life you came to the realization that you were broken and needed God, and you accepted Jesus' sacrifice on the cross for yourself, if you're a person who has done that, one of the marks for the beginning of every born-again experience is a meeting with God. Our relationship with God starts with the supernatural. It is not a natural relationship. It's not a natural religion. It wasn't just a natural choice. Like I choose this or I choose that. But rather you came face to face, we came face to face with God. And that was in our infancy. If in our infancy he met with us, how much more does he want to be meeting with his children as they grow? I don't know if you keep tabs on some of the things that are happening, at least from a testimony standpoint, in some of the other countries, notably Iran, Syria, some of these countries where the believers are being persecuted severely, China. These people are having encounters with Jesus even before they profess themselves as Christians. These people are having Jesus stand in front of them. One account was a lady said, I asked for the one true God. All I need to do is pray to the one true God and say, to the one true God, I need to know you. And that night, Jesus stood in her living room and she said everything in her shook and she wanted to run out of the room, but she said, this is what I asked for. So she stayed, and Jesus said to her, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. And then he left. See, we nod our heads. She had never heard those words before because she doesn't read the Bible. All she knew was that's what happened. So the next morning, it's either, I mixed the stories up, it's either a baker at a donut shop or somebody at work. The only believers she knew, she went to them and told them what had happened, and he opened his Bible and she wept and gave her life to the Lord. She didn't know those words were there. That was the evidence. I am who I said I am. This is my book, and I'm alive. So everything we're doing this morning is because he's raised from the dead. And in 1 Corinthians 15:14, Paul writes this, if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is vain, your faith also in vain. That's the linchpin of everything. He is raised from the dead and lives forevermore to meet with you and me. Amen. You're going to have an opportunity this morning to find out what a geek I am. Some of you already know. So I'm going to be very careful with this message because I can really become a nerd and lose everybody. And people walk out of here shaking their head and saying, what was that all about? So I'm going to keep things focused. And this morning's message is going to have 3 parts. Part 1, we're going to talk about the priest. Part 2, we're going to talk about the pictograph. And part 3, I'm going to sew them all together. So if at the end of part 1, you're like, where's he going? Well, I'm going to tie it all up. So I'm going to take 2 things that don't seem to be connected, and I'm going to attempt to put them together simply without being distracted. The priest. In the Old Testament, the priest had to be born a priest. He had to be born of the tribe of Levi. He had to be born into that family. You couldn't decide, when I grow up, I want to be a priest, because people would say, are you from the tribe of Levi? No. Well, then you can't be a priest. Priests have to be born a priest. That's why it's called the Levitical priesthood, the priests that are from the family of Levi. And the priest in the Old Testament was like a lawyer. He had to know so much stuff. And his whole job was to work with sacrifices. If you sinned, the scripture says you are to bring a bull or a lamb or a goat to the priest. The animal is slaughtered. Some of its blood is caught in a basin. And depending upon the sin, depending upon the type of offering, the priest would know. Sometimes that blood was dipped on the 4 horns of the altar. The altar had the altar was filled with fire, coals, wood. It was kept burning all the time. And on each of the 4 corners, there were these little horns, representing strength, representing God's strength. Sometimes the priest, with these sacrifices, I'm not going to get it. If you want to read the book of Leviticus, I tell you, it's fascinating. Most people say not, because it's filled with all these different ways that the sacrifice was used. So sometimes the priest was supposed to take the blood on his finger and wipe it on the 4 horns of the altar, and then sprinkle it on the altar. Sometimes it was poured out at the base of the altar on the ground. Sometimes the blood was taken in and sprinkled before the incense that was burning all the time, representative of prayer. Sometimes the offering was blood of an animal, like a bull, lamb, goat. Sometimes it was a bird, a turtle dove. For different sins, a turtle dove was required. Sometimes, or if you're poor, you were required to bring a grain offering, grain, edible grain. And the priest would know, oh no, you brought the wrong thing. If this is what you're doing, you got to bring me this. Or this lamb has a defect, I can't accept it. There were a number of types of offering. There was the sin offering. There was the burnt offering, where the offering was actually put on the fire and burnt and consumed. There were grain offerings, peace offerings, guilt offerings. I don't expect anybody to understand all this other than the main point I want you to know is this is what the priest did all day. It was a bloody job, and they had to be exact. They were up to their elbows in blood all day long, pouring it, dipping it, sprinkling it, catching it. That's also where they got their food. A portion of many of those offerings, a portion was given to the priest as his food for he and his family. So you're going to take part of the bull, sacrifice it, burn it. The other half belongs to the priest. Part of the grain we're going to put on the fire, and the Lord's going to accept it as your offering to him. But part of the grain goes to the priest and his family. Hannah's yawning, as many of you are. You're like, right, where are you getting? I want to make a point, and not to embarrass Hannah, because I understand. The point I'm making is the priest was up to his elbows daily in the sacrifice. He had to know it. It was his job. It was his expertise. He had to understand what applied to what he could keep, what he couldn't keep. And there were priests that died because they did things wrong. The sons of Eli, both of the sons of Eli died because they were messing around with religion. They forgot God was there. And the sacrifice was their food. Why do I say that? Because if we could turn to Revelation verse 1:6, or if you turn there, or we'll bring the slide up. The scripture says something that when you were born again, when you were joined to Jesus Christ, He made us to be a kingdom, priests to His God and Father. To Him be the glory and the dominion forever and ever. Amen. Like it or not, when you were born again and joined yourself to Christ, just like the old Levitical priests, you were now born into the priesthood. And what did a priest do? A priest helped connect people to God. What's your job in the world? Helping connect people to God. And the priest was working in the Old Testament near the very presence of God. The difference is you have the very presence of God living in you. We have the very living presence of God in us. When I walk into a room, it now becomes a Christian room. Why? I brought Christ there. He lives in me. You know, there are a lot of people that talk about this thing isn't Christian, this thing, and I say, well, you know what? If you're involved with it, God's involved with it. You brought Him, so change it. Let Him see what He wants to do with it. We can't be so narrow, folks. We are containers of the living God. So, part one, we are priests, and the old priesthood is to be a picture to us. It's not irrelevant. So now, we settled with that? Didn't lose anybody along the way? Part two, I want to talk about the pictograph. If we could have the first pictograph up. Hopefully you can see it. It might be a little small. A pictograph is a letter that also represents a thing, a letter that's accompanied by a picture. When you put these letters together, these letters become pictures put together that tell a story. This first letter is an ox head, and it's the word Aleph, letter A, first letter in the ancient Hebrew alphabet, not the modern Hebrew. This is ancient Hebrew, what they were initially using. The next letter is Bet. It is the picture of the floor plan of a tent. So the Old Testament tent, that was the floor plan. Aleph, I'll walk over here a little bit. Aleph means ox, strength, leader. Much of the ancient Hebrew pictographic language centered around daily life, agriculture, planting, harvesting, cycles, everything that had a function. It was a very functional language, as opposed to Greek. Watch out, nerd Alan, don't go too far. As opposed to the Greek, the Greek is very abstract. It talked about things that the way they appear and the meanings behind. But the ancient Greek or the ancient Hebrew was very factual, very functional. And so the first letter was Aleph. The second letter is Bet. It's where we get our word alphabet. It's the origins of our idea of letters that mean something, letters that have sounds. So the ox was the strongest of animals. The picture tells us it means strength, power, apostolic, chief, leader, pillar, oak, oak tree, ram. It doesn't just mean one thing. In English, one word means one word or two words. In ancient Hebrew, a word or a letter meant a paragraph. The word bet is the picture of a tent. It represents the idea of house or being inside or something enclosed, the inner chamber. The letter bet, which is the word picture for a household, into a family. When Aleph and bet are together, they become the Hebrew word Abba. Abba, A-B, Abba. It means the word father. The Aleph and bet in word picture form show that the father is the strong leader of the house. Cool? You see why? You see why I get caught off? But I'm trying to paint a picture. This is from Many Manna Moments, if you want to go on the internet. It's called Many Manna Moments. That's where. The next word I want to look at, and then I'll stop, I promise, is the word grace. Now, tell me quick, the definition, English definition of grace is unmerited favor. Two measly words. I know they mean a lot. I'm not minimizing it. The word grace, the first letter is offense or protection. It's the word chen, and it represents offense of protection. The second letter is seed. Is that none? And the idea of seed is it doesn't stop, it keeps going. When you put the two together, our Heavenly Father's pictograph letters in his word chen, chana, paint a picture of pitching a tent with him. Just like he pitched a tent in the tabernacle with the children of Israel. Second slide. We might say grace like this. May the place where God provides protection and provision for life be to you and for you a camp, a precious place of healing, strength, salvation, and rescue. For his fence of protection will not cease or fail, but it will continue to surround you and your offspring, your family, as he pitches his abode with us and teaches us through revelation. Boom. When they said grace to you, they meant a mouthful. They meant protection. They meant safe. You're in a safe place. You're in the place God pitches. And like a seed that grows, it doesn't stop. It keeps going. It's unstoppable because of who God is. So a pictograph is a powerful, powerful thing. And it's one of the first ways that the ancient Hebrews recorded their revelations of God, revelations. And you can see when you it's kind of like Christmas. If I say Christmas, we would come up with all these different ideas. Christmas, Hannah, since I picked on you earlier. Christmas, anything. Presents under the tree. Nate, Christmas. Christmas tree. John Keene, Christmas. Bethlehem. I would say chestnuts roasting on an open fire for no good reason. I would say sleigh bells ringing. Or one of my favorite all-season songs is God Rest Ye Merry Gentlemen. Let nothing you dismay. To save us all from Satan's power while we were gone astray. Tidings of comfort and joy. I sing it in summer. In English, we have these picture words. Christmas is a picture word. It doesn't mean the same thing. So if we're talking about Christmas, we would all have to kind of define exactly what it is we're talking about. And so in the ancient Hebrew, you needed context, you needed to talk, you needed to understand what the person was saying because they dealt with pictures, and pictures are strong and pictures are full. I want to carry this idea of picture even farther because the fact that God chose to work initially through a picture language unfolds even more beautifully. Could I have the next three verses, the next three portions, pretty rapid fire? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we saw his glory, glory as of the only begotten from the Father, full of grace and truth. God, after he spoke long ago to the fathers and the prophets in many portions and in many ways, in these last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world. And listen, and he is the radiance of his glory and the exact representation of his nature. He became a living pictogram. There were things about God in the Old Testament that they weren't getting. And God wanted to break that down. There's things about me you aren't catching. You aren't getting it. He is the exact representation of God's nature and upholds all things by the word of his power. When he had made purification of sins, he sat down at the right hand of the majesty on high. Done. Now, if we could go back to the first slide. In the beginning was the Word. What is a word? A word is an explanation of things unseen. You don't know what I'm thinking until you talk to me. A word is a bucket that carries with it a picture, an explanation. You may watch me, but if you haven't talked with me, you don't know me. You cannot know me until you talk to me. I love this about my wife. If you're a guest at our house, she wants to know you. You'll not get away with eating dinner and just sitting there. Because if you just sit, she'll ask you questions. Because she wants to know. It's too valuable. If you're in my house, I want to talk with you. I want to know what's in there. What are you thinking? I love that. I've learned from her. Talk more. Now she says, slow down. You talk too much. And I confess. So words make things clear. Words unfold things that you would never know otherwise. But even with the words, we were still missing it. There were still things we weren't getting. So the Word became flesh and blood, a living picture as the exact representation of the nature of God. God saying, I know you weren't getting it. So let me make it even more clear. Let me give you a living pictograph. It's how he works. It's how he worked in the Old Testament. You see why I can be such a geek about this stuff. Because I'm like, what he did with letters in the Old Testament, in the New Testament, he did with a person. God wanted us to know that if I had it my way and I could be born anywhere and tell you something about myself, I would be born in a barn, in a cradle in the dirt, which we sang in our first song. I would think that's what I would choose, saith the Lord. If I had to be born anywhere, that's what I would do. Well, you wouldn't be born in a palace. No, it's not what I'm like. When your religion gets stuffy, you've stepped outside of him. He is not stuffy. He isn't highfalutin. He was born in a barn. My mom used to say that. Oh, you're born in a barn? We leave the doors open. Well, Jesus wanted us to know, God wanted us to know, this is what I'm like. And you know who I like to hang with? Shepherds that nobody else liked. Stinky shepherds. Who are the first people? Who did angels go to? That is all a picture. That isn't just a count. We're supposed to eat that as priests. You're supposed to chew on that so that your picture of God lines up more to what he's really like. He's different. I'm telling you, he's different than what we think. He's nicer, he's kinder, even than our best thoughts. Because you know what? All of us at best have only caught glimpses. And he wants them to increase. But in these passages, in these examples, all of it is so that we can know what he's like. when you weren't getting it with word, just written words. And oh, by the way, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was always a person. He was always the person that carried out the will of God. And when he knew that it was the will of God for man to be redeemed, the Word said, let me go. I go. I'm the one. You always send a word. The Word will do it. So he put on flesh, became a man, endured everything that we understand as a human. He lost a parent. His mother was an outcast. So that even during his ministry, they would throw it in his face. Yeah, we know who you really are. Your mom was a teenage girl who got pregnant out of wedlock and Joseph just covered it all up. Yeah, we know you were born in fornication. They still threw it up to him in his public ministry. He knew what it was like to be outcast, different. He knew what it was like to work hard. He worked hard for 30 years. Some of us would never make it because we have social media. And ready or not, we're going to put our opinion out there whether Father wants us to or not. Jesus waited 30 years so that when he spoke, it mattered. Many of our little fledgling social media ministries don't make a difference. They don't last. They aren't saying much worth remembering. Jesus waited 30 years. And when he spoke, we're still listening. We are still hearing it. So, when we come to the sufferings of Jesus Christ, I know we typically use the word the cross. And Paul said, I preach nothing but the cross of Christ. The cross is the key linchpin in all of Jesus' suffering, but it wasn't all Jesus did. If we could have the verse in Ephesians. In him we have redemption. You know what the word redemption is? Buying a slave. Rescuing a slave, setting him free. In him we have freedom from slavery through his blood. The forgiveness of our trespasses according to the riches of his grace. So what I would like to propose this morning is Jesus the living pictograph. And when he bled, he was giving us a picture. Where did Jesus' bleeding begin? Do you remember the whole suffering saga, the whole suffering journey, the blood of trail? Where did it begin? Do you remember the first bloodletting? In the garden. So that matters. If Jesus shed blood, it matters. He's buying something. What's he buying? Well, it's a whole picture. Because the anguish is coming from the inside. What God had given him to do was burdensome. He would rather not do it, and if possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. Has God's will ever become too heavy for you? Hard, difficult. Jesus' dreams were ending right there. The wife in the white picket fence, no more. The children, no children. Who's going to take care of his mom? Who's going to take care of his disciples and especially Peter? So many loose ends. Can you imagine the anguish that was so deep and the love that was so great that it would produce bleeding from his scalp? That's intense. He was buying something for you. You ever faced intense loss of dream? The will of God taking you somewhere you didn't want to go? He knows how to free you from that because he carried it for us. He knows how to carry intense, deep, personal anguish because he did it, and he was doing it for you, not for himself. He was then taken by the soldiers to the priests, and they slapped him and beat him and mocked him, insulted him. This is all what he's buying for you. He knows how to rescue you from mocking, from insult, from an unjust arrest. He was scourged. The Romans took him and whipped him with the cat of nine tails, ripped him to pieces. And the scriptures tell us he was purchasing physical healing for you. By his stripes you are healed. He then had a crown of thorns thrust upon his head. These are all pictures. Please, let's not think of them as events, but I'm giving you a living picture. What is a crown of thorns and why does it matter? Why did God use that picture? What does he want us to understand from it? Crown, something that wants to rule over you. Invasive thoughts that want to rule over you. Anybody have or know somebody with mental health issues? What is that? Invasive thoughts that are seeking to rule. What are addictions? Invasive thoughts that seek to rule. Depression, anxiety, fears. We try to medicate them and even that doesn't work. Jesus knows. Why? Because of the picture. And I think what I've seen about this pictograph, I think I'm just scratching the surface. I think you can find more. I'm not giving you a template to follow. I'm giving you a world to explore. I'm giving you something to prospect. You're going to have to work with this as a priest. Like a prospector, you're going to have to get in there and say, what did you do? What part of your sacrifice freed me from the slavery I am experiencing right now in my life? His blood fell on the ground, redeeming us from every curse, redeeming us from poverty. You are no longer called to work by the sweat of your brow and yield only thorns and thistles. His blood hit the ground. It was redeeming your ground, my ground, our ground. He was lied about. If you ever read the Gospels, I can almost get afraid that they're going to let him go because there was no evidence. Pilate 2 times said, I don't want anything to do with this. He tried to let Jesus go. And Jesus was silent, almost as if he said anything, he could have gotten himself off. But he knew it was for this hour he had come. You read it and see. You'd be like, Pilate wanted nothing to do with this. He was mocked. He was ridiculed. They took sticks and beat the crown of thorns onto his head. That was buying something for you, for me, something for our mental wholeness. The garden was internal anguish. The crown of thorns is external anguish, external assault and rule, a crown. God says, I'll let nothing rule you but me. I don't want anything ruling you. He couldn't even carry his own cross. I was healed in one of my knees one time because I saw that Jesus fell under the weight of his cross and his knee hit the pavement. That became a touch point for me in faith, and I was able to receive in that time, your knee was bruised so that my knee doesn't have to be. His hands and feet were pierced. What a picture. The scripture says, your flesh was crucified. His flesh was crucified, but what does your flesh represent? What you want. People talk about their flesh like my flesh is ruling. Well, you know what? No, it wasn't, because Jesus' flesh was nailed. It was powerless. There were a number of things that happened on the cross. He paid for our sins. He paid for our sin, the nature. Sin is the tree. Sins are the rotten apples on it. At the cross, he dealt with the power of sin, all its little sins, little nasty apples. The world was crucified to you. It does not have the power it says it does. Your flesh was crucified. Your flesh doesn't have the power it tells you it does. He drank bitter drink. Anybody drinking something bitter in your life? He did it for us. They stabbed him in his heart with a spear. He died. And he said, before he died, he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? This has never happened before. 30 years in secret, 3 years in public. I know when my Father leaves. He did that for us. When he died, the earth shook, the sky grew black, the veil of the temple was ripped from top to bottom, signifying that the way in is open. And on the third day, he was raised from the dead and appeared to his disciples, and then one time over, I think, 500, publicly. Everybody knew somebody who had seen him. This was no secret. This was no closet resurrection. And all of that was a picture. It's to be a picture. One of my earliest personal revelations was when I realized Jesus, by his stripes, I am healed. And the Lord healed me numerous occasions. I mean, I have so many stories. I was healed of a blister. I worked as a carpenter, and it was one of those things where I'm like, what will he do? I put my hand on a blister. About an hour later, I looked, the blister was gone. Now, I'm not writing a book. I'm not trying to get famous. I'm just telling you. It was like he was taking me on a little adventure. Let me show you. But that's not a template for healing. Our sister Hannah was healed about a year, maybe longer, maybe 2 years ago now, when she coughed so hard that she felt like she broke her ribs and the rib pain wouldn't go away. She was healed when she saw Jesus pierced by the spear. That became her faith contact point. So we can't just have this template we follow. There's parts of Jesus' suffering. He had to carry every element of the human condition if he was to redeem us from every element in the human condition. He was spit upon. They plucked his beard. Isaiah said his appearance was more marred than any man. He was beaten, plucked, spit on. Why? I'm carrying that for you. I'm buying something for you. I know how to relieve that burden from you, but you have to come to me. And it's not going to be a template. And you as a priest, here's where I tie these two together. As a priest, your job is the sacrifice. You cannot only get away with saying Jesus died on the cross for me. That is incomplete. There's so much included in there is a bunch of other places where he paid for the human condition. At the cross, of course. At the scourging, of course. But also, we have big problems in the church with depression and fear. Invasive thoughts. I'm saying, priest, eat that sacrifice. What do you mean eat it? Chew on it. Think about it. Think about what the picture means. Talk to him about it. Show me how the crown of thorns is applicable to me in my situation right now where I'm so afraid, where thoughts want to rule in me that shouldn't be ruling. Apply the sacrifice to that place where the will of God seems hard for you. It seems like too much for you to carry. The place where finances are, what am I going to do? The fear of the future, all of these things. There's somewhere in there, there's a sacrifice for you. There's something he paid for. You have a whole account in heaven. You have a bank account. And one is earmarked distress. One is earmarked healing. One is earmarked mental health. One is earmarked shame and everything I deserve, insult, mockery. One is earmarked the flesh. One is earmarked sin, the world, separation from God. It's our job as priests to learn how to make withdrawals. I have it. He bought it. It's done. It's finished. He raised from the dead. You and I are rich. But we have to learn how to make withdrawals. We have to learn how to, and it starts with, I believe. I believe you did this for me. Now show me how to get it. Show me how it relates. In some cases, we are told to apply. Do you know? Remember in the Old Testament, they were told to apply the blood. They either put it on the altar, or they put it on their doorpost, they put it on the lintel. The word apply has two meanings, and both of them are wonderful. In the Old Testament, they were told to physically put it. In our New Testament life, we're called, tell God its relevance to you. Talk to him about how it's relevant. Father, I'm so thankful that Jesus took a crown of thorns, and that's relevant to me right now because I am under such mental duress. I'm under such mental pain. And I'm just saying right now, Heavenly Father, that Jesus suffering, him taking the crown of thorns and them beating it into his scalp, that's relevant to me. That's applying. It is relevant to my situation. Jesus taking stripes on my back is relevant. Hannah Thomas, when you took the spear in your side, that was relevant to my ribs. And God said, when I see, remember the Old Testament? When I see the blood, I will. We want to do the things that result in God saying, I will. When I see you applying the blood onto a situation, I will. This isn't just, remember, the Old Testament priests, they forgot that the presence was there. Some of them died. When we as priests, we're supposed to be up to our elbows in the sacrifice. It's supposed to be our food. We're supposed to be getting to the place where we're more skilled in different aspects of the sacrifice. The grain offering, the turtle dove, the lamb or the goat, the anguish in the garden, the crown of thorns, the scourging. Can you see the parallel? Hopefully my geekiness and nerdiness is not getting in the way of you understanding something that is beyond priceless and has the potential to change every life in here, because as you do your part, you apply the aspect of the sacrifice that is relevant. When he sees you doing it, he will, because he'll not let anybody do anything with his son's sacrifice without rewarding it, without glorifying what his son did. You cannot take hold of what Jesus did and begin to apply it and begin to want it and begin to put it and want to receive with God. You will never meet with indifference with God, because that was my son's sacrifice. It's unparalleled. It's unprecedented. It was so acceptable to me, I raised him from the dead. So we are called to be the people that take it and apply it and chew it. Sometimes, unless you're my son, most of us, when we take a bite full of food, we have to chew it. Sometimes for long moments before we can digest it. My son apparently is like a snake, and he can just swallow it. But as us normal human beings, sometimes you may have to take something that is precious. You may have to chew on it before it can actually get in there as nourishment. That's okay. This idea of instant Christianity is not from God. Back to the pictograph. All of it is a picture for us. You are a priest. That Old Testament picture of a priest is for you to use and for you to be able to understand. This is what you've been called to. I know you're a butcher, a baker. I know you're a candlestick maker. But in addition to it all, beyond that, that's not who you are, that's what you do. When people ask me what I do, I tell them, but I understand it's not who I am. Who we are is much different than what we do. Because I can be a butcher, a baker, a candlestick maker, but what I really am is a priest. And what I'm learning to find about what Jesus sacrificed is so deep, it has to be mined. It has to be prospected for. You can't handle it. Is that old line? You can't handle the truth. Jack Nicholson and A Few Good Men. We can't handle the truth. It's too big. We have to get glimmers and glimpses. And God's saying, if you will just let me, I'm going to give you, and you know what? 2 weeks ago, I had a glimpse of God. And I wept. And it was the briefest of brief glimpses. And I thought, what I saw was you are good. You're gooder than we know. We don't know anybody like you. And if we saw you fully, we would melt, we would explode, we would be like, so it's for our sake. It's not for his. He's not hiding. He's caring. So the old priesthood is a pictograph for us so that we might know what we're supposed to be, what our food is, what our job really is, how we get what we get. Jesus appearing is a living pictograph. It's not a template. And if I am expecting you to get more, for you to take what I've given you today and go farther so that I come to your house and say, please talk to me about what you saw. This isn't for one person. It's not for the pastor. It's for everybody. And it's a picture, so it's available to you. And actually, to tell you the truth, without everybody's picture together, we aren't going to fully see the Lord. One of the problems with the American structure in the church is you only ever hear one person's perspective. God's bigger than an elephant. And I tell you, we can talk about the part we've seen, but we need the cumulative report. Because that Rich Croce might have seen something that I don't even imagine. A trunk? Tusks? What are you talking about? All I've ever seen is a big flappy ear. So, what I would like to leave you with is, hopefully, hope of a land to explore. It's not been exhausted. We have barely tapped what Jesus has accomplished. All of those, Jesus as a living pictograph, don't you love that he said, you want to know something cool about me? If I could be born anywhere, I would be born in a stable. I love the smell of animals. I love the smell of the barn. I worked as a dairy farmer. Nate worked as a dairy farmer. I loved it. I called manure mud. It helped me resolve the fact that I was eating donuts while walking through it. And that's true. I loved everything about it, the smells. The dirtier I was, the cleaner I felt because I had come out of a life of partying and drugs. The dirtier I got, the cleaner I felt. His life was a pictograph, but his sacrifice, starting at the garden, those are all little pictures. We got to chew on it, folks. We have too many people suffering and too many people that don't know how to help because we also haven't mined. We haven't mined what's there. So, the resurrection is the evidence. God said, everything he did, I approve. I accept. That means there's a lot of things you don't have to be carrying. You and I do not have to be carrying around. But we do have to go to him because he's the only one who knows how to say, don't use the scourging today, Hannah, Thomas. I want you to use the spear. That'll be your touch point for health. That'll be the touch point for your healing in ribs. We can't make this religious. It's got to be relational. But there is a whole realm of freedom. There's a whole realm, there's a whole dimension of walking with God that we haven't touched yet. And that's why Paul said, I was determined among you to preach nothing but the cross of Jesus Christ. And that includes the garden. That includes the crown of thorns. That includes the scourging. That includes the spear. That includes the insults and the mockings and the beatings and the spittings and the pluckings. I was determined to preach nothing among you except Christ and him crucified, because that's where all the payment took place. You have more in your heavenly account than you have accessed. Come to me so that I can teach you how to make significant withdrawals that will change your life. Happy Easter.